So the next night at the duel, the bunch rides up in a cool formation and Radley swings out to park horizontally in front of them when they stop. He does his nightly routine of childish insults, Malcolm snarls about it, and Callan and Yusei prepare to duel each other. Radley is not pleased to see Yusei, as he remembers Yusei calling to Callan the previous night when they were riding away. Callan assures Radley he won't lose on purpose, and Radley gives an awkward smile and says he knows that since losing means going to the mines. He has no idea that's exactly what Callan wants. As the duel goes on, Radley becomes concerned and wants assurance from the bunch that Callan can still win. Or maybe he just wants to make sure they don't lose hope in Callan themselves. Scotch, the only other bunch member with both a canon name and a canon appearance to match, awkwardly rubs the back of his head and tries to give assurance about Callan. Does Radley really feel he needs the bunch's assurance? It's a cliche element of gangs where the tough leader needs constant encouragement from others to feel good. This does not seem in line with Radley's character, however. This is the only time such a scene happens, and it would seem to contradict one of my favorite Radley scenes, which happens early in the next episode. In this other scene, one bunch member thinks Callan has gone loony after he starts talking of wanting to punish himself. This kid wants to take over the duel, but Radley calmly and confidently stops him and says, "Sure, Callan may be crazy, but he's also never lost. I still believe in you, Callan." Perhaps when Radley seems to want the bunch's encouragement, he really just wants them to realize Callan can still win. So, here I must unfortunately tackle my least favorite Radley scene in all of Crashtown. It's Japanese only, and I did not discover it until long after I'd fallen in love with Dub Radley. But despite my distaste of it, I have never shied away or pulled the technically Radley didn't do it, Ramon did card. That's technically true. If I wanted, I could simply ignore it since I consider the dub a legitimate verse and it doesn't happen in the dub. But I've always tried to include those scenes that were cut and not pretend they didn't happen. In the Japanese version, when Callan first starts talking about wanting to lose to punish himself, Radley suddenly out of nowhere threatens him, telling him his duel gun is wired to explode if he tries anything funny like attempting to cheat and lose on purpose. He tells him it could take his arm off. Callan gives the duel gun a blank look, while Yusei believes Radley and is rightfully outraged. Radley summons the bunch to stand around him and look tough. This scene truly is out of nowhere. It appears to be either really bad writing, perhaps when the writers suddenly realized the bunch looked pretty nice compared to Malcolm and they needed to do something to make them look awful, or perhaps it's a desperate lie on Radley's part when he fears he's losing Callan. He knows Callan is the best duelist he's got, and without him they're most likely sunk. He doesn't want Malcolm to get full control of the mine and the town, whether that's solely for greedy reasons or not. Callan is aloof and unfriendly, he has his own agenda. Radley quite naturally could fear losing him when he starts talking about wanting to lose. With nothing else working, he might resort to Malcolm's tactics of intimidation and fear out of desperation to give Callan new motivation to win. Also, the bunch seem like good kids. They don't terrorize the town like Malcolm's crew does. They're quiet and keep to themselves in the anime, but they idolize Radley. If he wants them to pretend it's true and come around him to quietly enforce it, they'd do it. Alternately, one could say they might idolize him so much they'd follow him even if it was true. But it just doesn't appear to fit their established behavior. There is absolutely no indication they want to hurt people, unless they're cowardly and desperate like that guy later on. What's more, Radley does not seem to be a wasteful sort who would seriously injure someone he needs around. Going back to the fact we don't see his side of the mine, this could be the writer's way of showing that Radley is as bad as Malcolm. But if that was their intention, they failed miserably. Inserting one scene that just doesn't fit is not enough to be convincing that everything Radley appeared to be is a lie. We see so many scenes of how horrible Malcolm's men are. It's established early on when they're shown shocking Jordan and his friends. In A Fistful of Dollars, it's the Radley counterpart gang that attacks the protagonist when he rides into town. But in Crashtown, they've changed it, so it's Malcolm's gang who does that instead. They could have left it as Radley's gang if they wanted to show that Radley's gang is nasty too. There were so many chances they could have shown this and didn't. How do they think it will be believable to suddenly spring it on people with no warning? That's also one of the major complaints people have made about twist villains like Hans, how there are no clues to the audience and his villainy truly does come out of nowhere. And it's not a recent problem. It's been a thing like in old detective shows from the 70s and 80s, in Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys books. They suddenly will spring a twist villain out of nowhere. And sometimes there are clues to the audience if they're looking very carefully, but sometimes there's not. And it just feels as random as this threat Radley made. And that happened a lot, unfortunately, in the final season of the Rockford Files. It was a two-parter with Lauren Bacall, where her friend was the villain, and it wasn't explained well at all. If there's a good reason for the sudden change to villainy, then I could still accept it, but it just felt so contrived and so stupid, and it didn't make sense at all with the character's personality or how she behaved throughout the entirety of those episodes. And the same thing with another episode called The Hawaiian Headache. They just suddenly pull a villain out of a hat at the end of the episode, no less. They don't even show it. They just have, in the epilogue, a very unlikable guest character telling Rockford that this guy was the killer. And it wasn't satisfying. It didn't make sense. The plot was really a mess anyway, and that didn't help. And, I mean, like, it was clear that they had not planned it out. And suddenly they came to the end of the episode and realized, oh no! We don't have Rockford find out who the killer is. And that was like the whole point of the episode, especially since the body was found in his car. You'd think they could have put together a better explanation than what they did, just randomly making a character the villain when it didn't even make sense with his scenes in the episode. So, my feeling on Radley's threat is ultimately that it was a desperate lie, and the bunch went along with him because they trusted him and idolized him. We're never shown either way, but I will never not feel that the scene wasn't badly contrived, especially when it's never mentioned again, and the scene I love with Radley saying he believes in Callan actually happens afterwards. Now, you'd think he'd mention the threat again at that point, but he doesn't. Left to itself, the scene shows no indication that Radley has just threatened Callan. Instead, it just seems to show his confidence and belief in his duelist. It's adorable. I do feel the need to note that in spite of the threat, Japanese fans still love Radley and don't seem to feel it's a deterrent to him being around or even growing close to Callan. Either they don't believe the threat, or they feel that even if it's real, it's not an unforgivable sin. And I have to admit, if you weigh that threat against things that over half the Yu-Gi-Oh! Cast has said and done, Callan included, I'm sorry to say it is minor by comparison. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is full of messed up characters, but one of the franchise's biggest themes is forgiveness. Merrick can be forgiven for running an international crime ring and trying to kill Atem and all his friends because of a mistaken belief that Atem killed his father. Callan can be forgiven for flipping out and mistakenly believing his best friend betrayed him and being tricked by the darkness into helping destroy the world. So shouldn't Radley be forgiven for making one lone threat against Callan that might not even be true? I think so. Apparently the Japanese fans do too. Now, I prefer to believe the threat didn't happen, but it did. So I don't ignore it. I have always addressed it in my stories because I felt it was important to address it. It was important not to shove it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. It should be addressed because it needed to be pointed out that it made no sense. And so I came up with the only explanation I could, that it was a desperate lie. One could alternately say that is as far as he would go really to try to protect the town, But again, I don't think he would be so wasteful as to really endanger somebody that he needs. Of course, the duels endanger people every day, but I mean, I don't think he would add extra danger and risk harming them so they couldn't still duel for him. It just doesn't make sense. Now, eventually, Callan does, of course, lose. But instead of Yusei being able to rescue him as Barbara promised, she betrays him, and Lawton rides in, back from some mysterious training to take over. Radley recognizes him and is horrified, but bravely steps up to try to duel him. He's the last line of defense in town, and he knows it. He believes he still has a good chance of winning, and rightfully so, considering how powerful his deck is in Over the Nexus. We sadly don't see one card of it here, as Lawton pulls out some bizarre strategy that allows him to deliver 800 points of effect damage for every spell card drawn, and he has enough spell cards to take Radley out right there. Lawton is never even shown shuffling his deck. He may have cheated that result. I really wouldn't put it past him. Also cut from the dub is the full force of Lawton's assault. His monster, Gatling Ogre, delivers the effect damage from a Gatling gun, and Radley's being hit with 40 rounds of it. There's a mysterious force in town that seems to make some of the cards real, as shown earlier when one of Callan's cards creates a windstorm, and in the final scene of his duel with Lawton, where Lawton collapses unconscious after being shot by Infernity Doomslinger. Sweet, sweet justice on Lawton. Take that for hurting my precious Radley. Here, Radley clearly feels the pain of being hit by 40 rounds of gunshot. He clutches his chest, exclaims in the original, "That was dirty, how could I have stopped that?" and collapses unconscious. The dub simply tries to make it look like Lawton is skilled, but it doesn't take skill to draw 5 spell cards, unless you're like tuned into the heart of the cards or whatever, and I'm pretty sure Lawton isn't. Radley is right. That was a dirty move, even if Lawton didn't cheat. Radley didn't even get one move to try to beat him. Now, I'm not going to go into a rant or debate about the validity of one-turn kills in the real card game, but I definitely object to it in this scenario. Following Radley's defeat, the bunch is horrified and frightened. Lawton threatens all of them with the same, and they give in, joining him instead of trying to fight for Radley's freedom in the town. Radley was what kept them strong, and faced with a big bully who just took him out, their hope crumbles. How could they beat someone Radley couldn't defeat? Now, Radley, Callan, and Yusei are all dragged to the mines. Now, some people might think I wouldn't like how Radley falls apart when he wakes up being taken into the mines. He physically shakes, terrified, after he's fitted with a shock collar and sees how badly the miners are being mistreated. This is a perfectly normal human reaction. Of course, Yusei, as the anime's hero, doesn't react this way, and since this is what Callan wants, he certainly doesn't either. Radley, however, is a broken man. Everything he fought for is now gone. The town, the mine, his friends. He's been trapped for what he thinks is the rest of his life in a mine where everyone is tortured. His only companion he knows is someone who's always been aloof with him. And he has another very human, very relatable reaction. He snaps. He grabs Callan, shaking him by the shoulders as he screams this is all Callan's fault for losing, and now they're stranded for the rest of their lives, breaking their backs day and night. In the Japanese, he seems to be the most bothered by the fact that Callan still won't talk to him. He repeatedly cries, "Say something! Say something!" I find it interesting that Yusei just lets Radley's tirade go on. He thought Radley meant it about the exploding dual gun, and it would seem he surely wouldn't like to see Radley flipping out on his best friend, whom Yusei now knows is mentally unwell. Something which I would like to point out Radley does not know or understand. Yes, he made the flippant comment that maybe Callan's crazy, but he has no idea what's really going through Callan's mind or what prompts his severe feelings of wanting to lose. So why does Yusei just let Radley yell and shake Callan without so much as a cut it out? Does he just figure the guards will intercede and he doesn't want to draw their attention to him? Maybe he's using Radley's ranting as a distraction to hide the fact that he's quietly pulling a nail out of a board to use later. Knowing Yusei's resourcefulness, this seems likely as at least part of the reason. Could another part possibly be that he knows Radley is afraid and upset and should be allowed to get out his feelings as long as he's not really hurting Callan? Probably not, but it's interesting to think about anyway. The last we see of Radley in the anime, a guard is cruelly pulling him back by the hair and dragging him off to start mining. In the dub, Radley is moaning that he wants out, which is also human, but was probably added just to make him sound pathetic. In the Japanese, he does not say this that I can recall. Yusei later determines to rescue all the prisoners, and he and the kids are able to get Callan on board with this idea after Callan sees the cemetery and is in horror, believing everything is his fault. Now, do some of the graves belong to duelists Callan sent to Radley's part of the mine? We don't know. It's likely some do, but they could have even died in accidents like mine shafts collapsing rather than torture. We never see Radley's side of the mine, so we really don't know. And we're left to assume that Yusei and Callan rescue Radley, but we don't actually know this either. He's never seen or spoken of again. Seriously, writers? What? That's ridiculous. We also don't actually know Malcolm's fate either. The last we see of him, he's been betrayed by Lawton and Barbara, and the bunch is grinning down at him. At the end, we only see Lawton and Barbara being loaded into a sector security van. We have no idea what happened to Radley or Malcolm. And honestly, whether you care about them or not, that's a plot hole. They were important to the arc. Their fates should be known. Now, there's a separate video game verse, Over the Nexus, in which things play out differently and Radley is not sent to the mines. He has a much more stereotypical tough biker attitude here, is quite high-strung, and seems very bitter towards Callan, which may or may not be because Callan always rejects him. In this version, both gangs are terrorizing the town seeking new members, something that doesn't happen in the anime. Later, Malcolm declares open war on Radley and seems intent on killing him. The player character works for Malcolm, so of course Radley is not friendly to them. But instead of declaring open war right back, Radley is just trying to get away with the bunch. He, Malcolm, and Lawton are all dragged to the facility. Thankfully, at least people aren't being given criminal marks anymore, but I do not like this fate for Radley, especially given how I feel things are not cut and dry about the situation. One very interesting thing about this version, however, is that only Radley is not made fun of by the script after being taken away. The other prisoners are Malcolm, Lawton, Sid, and Sid's gang. You can look at all their rooms. Malcolm and Sid sweated grossly in their beds. Lawton stuffed a lot of stuff under his bed. Worst of all, one of Sid's gang members wet the bed. No, I am not kidding. I wish I were. But with Radley alone, when the player inspects his bed, they get the message, nothing out of the ordinary here. At least the game gives Radley that much dignity. In both verses, Radley is a complex character. He retains his philosophical side in Over the Nexus, which is an interesting contrast with his colloquial speech pattern and tough biker attitude. If you duel him and lose, he smirks and tells you it's pointless to strive so hard. But there's something deeply sad about that comment, as though it has the deeper meaning of him acknowledging how he fought so hard for the town and lost everything. Now, if you duel him and win, he'll think you cheated, which I don't really like because it makes it sound like that is always his accusation if he loses, and that cheapens how he felt about losing to Lawton, which really wasn't fair. So I don't like that Over the Nexus does that at all, but at least it is a separate verse. And it wasn't so kind to Callan either. When Callan loses to you, he has a fit and says, I lost. How can I be satisfied with that? So Radley's not the only character badly handled in that game. I'd be totally remiss not to mention the good thing in that game. Radley's deck is the crystal beasts. This is genius since he loves wealth and the beasts all have gems. But it also opens up a whole new intriguing facet of his character for the anime, where the crystal beasts are extremely temperamental and rare. How would such cards have accepted Radley of all people to wield them? In anime lore, they've only ever accepted Jesse. One could argue they're likely not his cards in the anime, but since we don't see one card of his There's nothing to really say they couldn't be either. He also has possession of Haman, Lord of Striking Thunder, which is one of the sacred beasts, counterparts to the Egyptian god cards. I mean, this is big stuff. For him to have Haman and be able to control it, his heart must be strong. And for the crystal beast to accept him, he must be more noble than some think he is. This really excites me, and I would love to see it further explored in anime canon, which of course we know is never going to happen. In game canon, I don't think it really matters, since I don't think the cards have the same rarity and personality factors there. That might depend on how they were introduced in the GX games, which I haven't played, and if the GX games are meant to be the same canon as the 3 5Ds World Championship games. I have no idea. And in the anime, Radley is much more smooth than in Over the Nexus. He's calm, cool, and collected throughout everything going wrong until finally he just snaps in the mines. I do not understand why it's popular in fandom to portray him as high-strung unless fans are either going by the video game verse or think that because he snapped in the mines it means he'll break at every little thing. I hope it's the former, because the latter just wouldn't be fair. Radley was pushed to his absolute limits before he broke. We don't know how long the war was going on, but it was a long time. He put up with Malcolm's nonsense, with Callan rejecting him probably every day, with the stress of possibly losing Callan once Yusei appears, and he never so much as raises his voice. He only snaps after he is publicly humiliated by Lawton and everything is taken from him, and he's cast into a literal torture chamber without even one friend. How many people would stay completely calm in that situation? Give the guy a break.